and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hello. Hello, Grant.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Grant Smith-Ellis. I am here hosting the 6th in MassCann's Virtual Education Village series of panels. Today, as you can see alongside me on the screen, I have the distinct honor and privilege of hosting a panel alongside two gentlemen, the current president of MassCann, Mr. Bill Flynn, and the former president of MassCann, Mr. Bill Downing. For those of you who are not familiar, although many of you watching on the MassCann page will, of course, be familiar with these two gentlemen and the organization, MassCann is an activist nonprofit that works in Massachusetts and is dedicated to fighting to repeal federal prohibition. So they are an anti-prohibition group, and the mission of the group is to end the federal prohibition of cannabis and to continue to protect the rights of cannabis consumers. The discussion we're going to have today is going to provide a little bit of an in-depth retrospective on the history of MassCann, how my two guests, Mr. Flynn and Mr. Downing, came to be involved with cannabis activism, and what's going to be coming next for the grassroots cannabis industry policy organizations going forward. For those of you who are unfamiliar with MassCann, you can find out more information about the organization at masscann.org, and you can also sign up to become a member on the website as well, right up on the top right-hand corner. You can click the membership button, and for $25 a year, you can support the important work that MassCann does that we're going to get a little bit more into today. So, with all that said, and now that we've given a minute or two for folks to hop on the screen, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Flynn and Mr. Downing for their introductions. So please, gentlemen.
Hi. Hello.
Okay, Bill, why don't you go first?
Why don't I go first? Okay. Hi, my name is Bill Flynn, yes, and I'm the president of the Massachusetts Cannabis Reform Coalition. This is our 31st year again, going into our activism, which is more or less slowed down by this COVID-19 coronavirus thing. But, you know, people are still talking, motions are still being made. We do have an event that comes up in September. This is the Boston Freedom Rally. And yeah, there's questions. What's going to happen? Where are we going to go? What's going on? We have plans for ideas in the mix now. I don't want to divulge too much. But yes, we have plans for this too, for the virus. But, you know, the ultimate thing is to be on the Common in September for our rally, our get-together of education, entertainment, music, good people that get together and congregate, and, you know, like-minded folks. A day of peace where you get thousands of people onto the Common. We say the Common, Boston Common, is the first place on the planet that was set up for free speech, you know, and agriculture. The cows, they used to bring the cows and the farm animals to the Common, and they would graze, and there'd be a big farm day there. And I'm not sure, I can't remember the man's name who dedicated all this stuff to, like I say, to be this spot on the Common for free speech and agricultural. And then the garden was set up to be, you know, again, a public garden where people were able to go, anybody all around the world, to come and enjoy flowers from all over. That's all the flowers that, you know, have little tags on them, the trees, everything over there. So it's a pretty interesting place to be. And like I said, to bring a lot of people there for, say, the biggest free concert of education and music in Massachusetts, if not on the East Coast. Only second to Seattle Hemp Fest, which is, I say, a younger partner in what we do. But they do very well out there in Seattle.
Mr. Downing?
Sure. Well, as Bill mentioned, we're 31 in our 31st year. So we were actually started in 1989, and the whole mission of MassCann as a nonprofit public education organization is to bring about change by informing the public about all aspects of the use of cannabis. And that, of course, includes four major categories of the use of cannabis. There's the industrial use for making all kinds of hemp products. There's the medicinal use of cannabis. There's the religious use of cannabis as a sacrament in many religions. And if you look back through the Christian religion, you realize that it's a sacrament for the Judeo-Christian community as well. And then lastly, as a recreational drug. And we wanted to make sure that people understood all of the aspects of the plant because it is so valuable in so many, many ways. It's actually an incredible plant. It's a food, it's a fiber, it's a medicine, it's a way to relax. It does so many things. And appreciation of this plant has been in the negative for scores of years. Many decades, marijuana was vilified by our government, spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year, every year, to teach the people of the United States that your brain is an egg and marijuana is a very hot frying pan. And if you use marijuana, your brain will be fried in that frying pan. Some of you may remember that ad.
Yeah.
That's what we were fighting against, was a government that was financing propaganda against marijuana to the tune, like I say, of hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And here we are, a tiny organization. You know, when MassCann started out, we had 10 original founders. And then we started working forward from then. I got involved in 1989. I called National Normal Headquarters to ask them how I could become involved. And they told me that there was a state organization that had just formed and that I should call Steve Epstein. And Steve Epstein is an attorney in Georgetown, Massachusetts. And he is the primary organizer of MassCann Normal. He brought together our mission statement. He brought together our initial set of bylaws, and the articles of organization, and did all the paperwork and organized a team of people to get MassCann started. So I met Steve and I started going to MassCann events. I went to the very first rally in Pittsfield, which was interesting. Unfortunately, it wasn't a great day weather-wise. But there was a fair crowd there, which shocked me. I had no idea there would be so many people who'd be willing to stand up. You got to remember, in 1989, things were a lot different than they are today. In 1989, it was very dangerous to stand up and say you supported the moderation of marijuana laws. There was a good chance that if you were in the newspapers or things like that, you could lose your job. And some of your friends might walk away from you because of your stating your ideas. So it was a lot harder back when marijuana was illegal. So the actual working group was fairly small. There were probably about 8 people, maybe at the most 10 people that were really involved at the very start. My first meeting, other than the rally, was at Maddie Webster's house. She lived in Somerville. And I met there with Maddie, who was the secretary of MassCann, and her partner, Dave Getchell, who at that point was the president of MassCann, and Steve Epstein, who was the treasurer. And it was an interesting meeting. I got a little taste of Steve's anger control issues. I don't really want to get into that story, but someday maybe pretty shortly after that, Dave Getchell, one of the reasons he had become so active was because he was suffering from skin cancer, and it was a very, very serious situation. And he was a researcher, a medical researcher, and he knew from being a medical researcher that there was good evidence about cannabis and its ability to fight against cancers. And so he bought some seeds from Amsterdam and bought a grow light and a whole bunch of indoor grow stuff. And his purchase of the seeds from Amsterdam were tracked by the DEA in an operation back then they called Operation Green Merchant. And so his home was raided. And though he had not planted the seeds or done anything with the equipment, it was all still in boxes. They charged him with intent to manufacture a drug by, of course, growing marijuana. So here's this guy who's already got horrific skin cancer and is in terrible, terrible condition. And now the DEA is raiding his home because he was thinking about growing some marijuana. He wasn't even growing it. He was thinking about it. And also, it's just a slimy operation. They're basically, the DEA is insisting on records from seed companies in foreign countries so that they can track people down and raid their homes. It was truly disgusting. But that's why Dave and Maddie first got involved, really, or a primary thing. They also, of course, saw the injustices behind cannabis laws. Everybody knows that they're a form of institutionalized racism. And things went on from there. Fairly shortly after that, Dave became quite sick, and then I became the president. I was the president for 14 years. We worked very hard on all four issues I just mentioned, but primary in our work was the work for medical marijuana. We saw that as being the most urgent need because there are so many people who were desperately in need of medical marijuana. And so thank goodness in 2012, MassCann got a lot of help from the owner of the Progressive Insurance Company. His name slips my mind right at the moment, but he was the primary funder of the medical marijuana initiative. He's since died. He was an amputee, and he had used cannabis to help with the phantom pains that he had from his amputated leg. And so he supported the medical marijuana campaign in 2012, which passed very handily. It was a very popular issue with the voters. And that was also an election year for the president. And that means whenever you have a presidential election year, you have a much greater turnout at the polls. And we knew that with more voters voting, we had a better chance of winning. So the ballot initiatives were always timed for presidential elections. And that's what happened. In 2012, we had a presidential election and we passed medical marijuana. In 2008, we had first started by decriminalizing marijuana. And 4 years later, in 2012, we did medical marijuana. And then later on, in 2016, we did, of course, the legalization of marijuana. And the decriminalization and the legalization of marijuana, those were both financed by the Marijuana Policy Project. So the medical marijuana one was the one that was financed by Peter Lewis. That was the guy's name.
Peter Lewis, right.
Peter Lewis, the founder of Progressive Insurance Company.
Right. Bill, not to cut you off or anything, but didn't MassCann have something to do with the earlier medical plan back in early 90s?
Yes.
With Governor Will.
A lot of work went into passing medical marijuana laws here in Massachusetts. The first one was passed at the end of 1991, signed by Governor Weld, and the second one was passed in 1997. And these were medical marijuana laws that were to allow the Department of Public Health to accept applications from patients who were in need of medical marijuana. And Though they couldn't distribute marijuana in any fashion, the hope was that if a patient was registered with the program, that could be introduced as evidence if they were a defendant in a marijuana prosecution. Actually, the Department of Public Health sent a letter to the DEA asking for advice because they wanted to use confiscated marijuana from arrests. Check it out, make sure it was pure, and then use that as marijuana for the medical marijuana patients. Of course, the DEA doesn't want to loosen anything related to marijuana at all. It's not in their self-interest to do so. So they flat out told the state, no, you can't do that. But there's other reasons for not using confiscated marijuana. You'd have to do an awful lot of testing to make sure that it was not contaminated in any fashion.
Hey, right. Moldy or mildew.
And now the mandate that the Department of Public Health start accepting applications for this program was unfunded. And the Department of Public Health basically sat on it. They said, you know, we're not being paid to do this. We're not going to do it. So here we are in 1997, 6 years later, and there's nobody in this medical marijuana program at all. There is no application to join the program, and there's no way to get medical marijuana, period. So we push again at the legislative level. We go for a second bill. This bill is instructing the Department of Public Health to write an application for patients who want to join the program and start registering patients for the program, something we had assumed that they would do in 1991 when they were told to do so. That, again, was signed by Governor Weld. Again, the Department of Public Health did nothing at all. They sat on it. And part of the reason is Weld left the office. The people who took over after him, Salucci and then that gal who was there for a short period, they had no interest in medical marijuana. And of course, then we saw when medical marijuana was passed during the DeVal Patrick administration, DeVal Patrick basically did the same thing as the Department of Health had been doing, and he completely sat on it, did nothing. And there was no progress on medical marijuana at all, basically, until we finally got Charlie Baker in office. And then things went very, very slowly. And that's the same way it is now. While we see other states approving licensing for dozens of dispensaries at a time in a single day, we get maybe one a month or one every 2 months here in Massachusetts.
6.
If I can just, it's actually a great segue to a question I was going to ask, which is, I know both of you have a lot of experience both with cannabis activism in the 80s and 90s, and then in that transition period from 2008 to 2016, and then now. Can you maybe each tell us a little bit about the differences between activism, say, in the past 5 years and in the 80s and 90s?
Well, I think a good example of that's the Freedom Rally. Because right from the start, the Freedom Rally had trouble from Boston police. It started off with them demanding that we pay them to come and bust people at our event. There was no reason for them to be there. There was never any problem with our event that needed police presence. So the only function the Boston police served at our event was to bust people for marijuana. And they wanted us to pay them to do that. And we downright refused. It was illegal for them to demand payments for us. As Mr. Flynn pointed out earlier, Boston Common is America's very first public place. And being the very first public place in the United States, it was the very first public place on the entire face of the earth. And as far as we know, in the entire universe, where assembly and speech were first guaranteed by law. And that is a very special status. That makes the place sacred ground for people who understand the importance of those things. And so protecting freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and expression on those sacred grounds for us became a mission. and it became the mission of the city of Boston to try and stop us from having our events there. So that was a big difference between the 80s and 90s, or the 90s primarily, and what happened later on. One of the ways they tried to stop us was by sending masses of police, some on motorcycles, some undercover, some uniformed police officers. We did a Freedom of Information Act request in 1998 and found that the city had spent over $50,000 in police overtime to pay for police to work on weekends at our event. And also, just so everybody knows, these police, especially the undercover police who were there, they were not an assigned detail. It was a voluntary detail. So none of those guys who were working as undercover cops there have any excuse about, oh, well, it's just the law and we didn't really want to enforce it, but we had to because we're police and we're forced to enforce all the laws. No, they didn't have to do that. They volunteered for this work. They could have said, no, I'm not interested in busting potheads all day long. That sounds like a dumb idea. They could have said that and they could have walked away. So every undercover who was at our event was somebody who had made the moral decision. This is what I want to do.
Yeah.
A bunch of jerks.
I got to get paid.
So in 1998, they arrested over 185 rally goers. They didn't have enough jail space to hold all those people. In all the jails in all of Boston, they didn't have enough jail space. So they started shipping people off to Revere and Chelsea and places like that to hold them in their prisons. And after the event, our attorney, John Swamley, and I drove around to the jails and bailed out anyone who couldn't pay for their own bail. And of course, with decriminalization, that basically all went away. Also, the police used to put up a barrier around our event, and they only allowed 7 entrance exits. They, for a couple of years, they were searching people who tried to enter our event. And so we had to do something about it. It's completely illegal. They can't search people without a warrant unless they get consent. But most people don't understand that. So they just consent. The cop says, hey, can I look in your bag? And they say, okay. And it was just horrific. So what we ended up doing was we rented a whole bunch of video cameras and we put out signage at all the legal schools, and we had law students come and videotape police doing illegal searches at our entrance exits. And once we had the videotape and we had an official complainant, that was Robbie Roadsteamer, by the way, was our official person who put in the complaint. Boston police backed off. And at first it was just they stopped the searches, and then shortly thereafter they took down the barriers from around outside of our event. But it took a lot of time and a lot of hard work to force respect. The city tried to deny us permits for many, many reasons. We were actually denied permits 7 years, and we had 6 court cases where we got injunctions allowing us to have our event despite the city not giving us a permit. And 6 times we went to court to deal with the city's outrageous denials of permits, blocking our freedom of speech and expression on this sacred ground. And 6 times we won. So obviously we were performing our constitutionally authorized duties, and the host of Boston Common, the person who is responsible for maintaining the honorable tradition of Boston Common as a place for freedom of expression, actually did just the opposite of what they're supposed to do. They used petty politics and their disagreement with the marijuana reform movement and the marijuana movement in order to deny freedom of expression and freedom of gathering, things like that we thought were sacred on this ground. Very infuriating, very infuriating. Yep. Only 1 year did we actually get a judgment, and we got a $30,000 judgment. Our attorneys, primarily John Swamley, were assigned to us by the ACLU Drug Policy Task Force, and so the $30,000 went to the ACLU, which was perfectly fine with us because they had done such a fine job for us.
Very glad.
So,
And many years after
that, when you went to the rally in the old days, you were taking a chance of getting busted.
Yep.
And that's changed now.
Which is a good.
Don't get as much trouble from the city about permitting. Although we still do get slapped.
That's a good segue, because
Right.
I was actually going to ask Mr. Flynn not only if he had any thoughts on that, but Mr. Flynn, if you had any thing you wanted to say about why it's so important today for folks to visit masscann.org and to join the organization with the work ongoing today.
Well, as Bill was saying, activism, grassroots, this is where it starts. And to have your voice heard, this is, the place to come to do it. We're a volunteer group. None of us get paid to do this. Yes, our membership is, membership pays for, a lot of our stuff that's, office work, papers to get notices out and, printing, shit like that. Mailings that we send out. We have a lot. We've got emails that go out. I say we're involved with different things. We're trying to get our education village out. That was one of the things I wanted was like at your senior center or city hall auditorium. Reach out to us and we can bring the education village by and explain what prohibition and where it's brought us. And what has MassCann done to change that prohibition here in Massachusetts? It's quite a story. It's history, and it's very helpful, very informative, especially helping people that become a medical patient. All like Bill was saying in the beginning, there was this an ad where they were a government ad where they had the frying pan and they put the egg in the frying pan. This is your brain on drugs, and the praise and alcohol ads. But we know we took a chance. We understand. We don't push it on anybody, but it's needed. People need a place to go where they'll get some understanding. People will get information that they need. Or where could they go to, a doctor who's understanding? You weren't, years ago, you weren't able to talk to your doctor about this. Even I think up until now. I mean, I have a good relationship with my doctor. She understands, everything I do, my whole history of, staying away from prescription drugs and everything. And my thing is the choice. I got sick years ago with cancer, and it was, radiation treatment, the chemotherapy, and I was like, well, what about cannabis? And well, yeah, you can try that, but I went with the radiation treatment too, along with it, which I found out, I needed the cannabis because I was more or less dying daily, melting. A friend of mine had helped me out and says, hey, try this. And I got up, I was motivated, I wasn't just hanging, I wasn't like melting, like I said, I wasn't phasing out. And then when I got in trouble, I was like, my thing was I couldn't let this happen to anybody else. It's, where does something start? Let it begin with me. Like I said, reaching out to, other people talking about it. And like Bill did, so I saw, somebody told me about High Times, and I looked in the back of High Times, and that's where I saw Steve Epstein's name, the lawyer. And I called him, and they had a meeting. It was, a members meeting in Peabody, the Holiday Inn. And that's where I met Bill. And like I said, you get a few people and it was more than a few people. It had to be about 20, 25, maybe 30 people there. But like-minded people. People that had a lot to talk about, people that, all kinds, the lawyer part about it, the growing part about it, stories of how, like I said, people that got arrested, being at the rally and people getting arrested, more or less entrapped as being arrested. The younger crowd, I think it was more or less with that, the undercover cops and stuff like that. Now, and this is probably while decrim, like I said, it backed up a bit. The arrests weren't there. The police were gone because we more or less had the rangers, are the policemen of the park, of the common. So they more or less took that over. But, decrim, like I said, no arrest. And then once medical came, like I said, it's a little backed off, a little more accepting. Because okay, we understand there are people that need it and stuff, but again, still pushback from the city. So it's the city's got to cover themselves, and but we're not going to walk away. Mask is what we do. It's civil disobedience, and I don't think you can look at it anywhere in the world other than what's going on now, that you'd have all those people in one place and not have a problem. I mean, yes, there was a couple of small things that happened at the rally. I say small because of the community of the disasters that could have happened. We've been very, very, very lucky. Over the years with what we do, and it's still to this day, people need to stand up. People need to, for what they believe in. And, whether people think you're right or wrong, you still have that right to say it. And, yeah, people have the right to speak out against it, but it's how you get out and speak out against it. You know what I mean? This doesn't have to be violence. It doesn't have to be, arrests and stuff like this. This is, like I said, a very large group of people that get together to have a good time and, share stories, music, entertainment, talk, education. It's still, it's still going, and it's growing and growing, because now with this somewhat legalization, people are interested. They're reading, they're talking to people, they're, gardening, they're growing themselves. Given, I don't know, everybody's getting involved. Even people that don't even smoke, people are trying to get involved. It's bringing a community together that was kind of falling apart, I think. And I think that's just what it is. It's about community gathering. And with what we see going now, it's kind of like, it's putting a big cramp in it at the moment. But, a couple of months from now, or maybe not, maybe, later on, this can get back to what we do, what we add. And it's not like that's it. Like I said, trying to get out to all the 351 cities, towns in Massachusetts, that'd be great. But if we could centrally locate in your county, people out in Massachusetts, anywhere. If you want MassCann to come out, we can bring the Ed Village out there, eventually, and discuss what we do, and everybody can become a part of it. Maybe have a small rally out in that area at some point. MassCann's involved with the cancer walk. We did an epilepsy walk last year. These that we get involved in these things because, again, we're educating the public about, what MassCann. Oh, you guys smoke weed, but when you explain to these people that, it's more than just smoking weed. There's extracts, there's edibles that could help children that are, I believe, safer. And parents shouldn't be worried about that. They should be able to find a place where they can go and get some information, and then, make their own decisions, especially for their family, Well, and like I said, we're here. We're just trying to help.
Well, it's really a good segue, just like Mr. Downing's statement, actually, because I was about to ask sort of either of you gentlemen if you wanted to talk a little bit about the work that MassCann does outside of the Freedom Rally, and you just kind of dove right in without me even asking. So that was great. And part of that leads me to actually ask, of all that work you guys have done, both together, maybe even individually, over the years, what is it that you're most proud of with the work that you've done or that MassCann's done? And to kind of complement that, what makes both of you so passionate about being involved with grassroots cannabis activism to begin with?
Well, I think the ultimate measure of, whether MassCann has been successful or not is whether we succeeded at legalizing marijuana. And apparently we did. Now, whether MassCann was highly instrumental in the passage of the legalization of marijuana or only somewhat instrumental is a matter of debate. But ultimately, there's your measure. We succeeded in legalizing marijuana, and it's hard to argue that MassCann has failed in any way when you see that happen. Which brings up the whole other aspect. Bill was talking about the Cancer Walk and some of these other events that we've done, and we do have, we do support charities through walking with them and raising money with them and things like that. And we do have other things other than the rally. For instance, a lot of times we have the MassCann Summer Members Meeting Picnic, which is, basically an outdoor party in a park somewhere. We have a great time, and when we can do it, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do that this year, but the big other thing, and the big other thing that I'm proud of is our work on legislation. Now, we are a public education organization, so by law, only 49% of our effort can be associated with legislation. 51% of our effort has to be associated with public education, because that is actually what we are. And if you have more than half of your effort and money going toward legislative work, then you have to register as a campaign finance kind of a committee. And the regulations are very, very different. You have to publicly expose who all of your donors are and all kinds of other stuff like that. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to remain a public education charity, so we could accept donations without having to expose who's supporting us publicly. One of the things that we have done with that 49% of our money and effort is we have worked on legislation, whether it's organizing lobbying days where we have volunteers go in and meet with legislators and legislative aides and people like that with a talking points list, talking about what it is we need legislators to do, or whether it was financing actual lobbying efforts. And probably very few people know, but Bill and I were very intricately involved in this whole thing when MassCann spent about $30,000 on lobbyists in 2015 to help us with the legalization of marijuana in 2016. So regardless of what you think of MassCann's other work and whether the rally was actually helping support or whether, associating the counterculture with our movement was a bad thing, which is some people in early MPP days used to think, or whether you think MassCann has been a very positive energy, which was what I would say about it, because of course a lot of the voters who were young people that came to our rally grew up and became real voters when they got a little older. And I think that's part of the reason why the ballot initiative won. But another part of the reason is because we had real lobbyists. We hired Jack Hall and Tara Hopper, and they worked the halls for us. And they are very tuned professionals. They know just how to do it. And I'm pretty darn sure that our lobbying efforts had a lot to do with our legislation moving forward the way it did.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that I think is very much a testament to the fact that MassCann, as we were talking about, is a public education charity, and the real world impact of public education charities when they're working at their most refined capacity is changing the law. And so these changes that MassCann has helped to facilitate have made a marked impact that will continue to proliferate even as this new industry goes 10, 20, 50, 100 years into the future. So it actually is kind of tied into a question I was going to ask both of you gentlemen as well, funny enough, which is obviously when you do lobbying, you come up across all sorts of different forces that work in the democratic process, whether they be prohibitionist forces or corporate forces. So how does a grassroots community help to insulate itself from corrupt forces who are trying to manipulate the process just for their own profit rather than the best interest of the community?
Well, I'm sure you can imagine that if a police chief from a town goes to a legislative hearing, that the legislators at that hearing tend to sit up a little more straight. They tend to open up their ears and their eyes, and they give that chief of police a lot more attention and respect than they would any other normal person, like our normal activists. You had to, after going to legislative hearings, which are basically horrific. I mean, there may be good reasons why the legislature wants to have the hearings the way they have them. And that's because they're trying to actually limit public participation in legislative processes. Because these legislative hearings are just torture.
They're painful.
And and they give you 3 minutes to talk. And, of course, if you're a chief of police or another legislator or someone who's got status in the community, you can ramble on for 15, 20 minutes and they won't stop you. But if you're just a regular schmuck, like a marijuana activist, then your 3 minutes are up and you're saying, okay, Mr. Downing, your time is up. You'll have to move on. Yeah. And since I'm not a chief of police, since I'm not a legislator, since I'm not a member of a city or town council, what you have to do is you have to have a compelling story. You have to have some heart-wrenching thing you can say to them that will actually make them pay attention. And so, you use something like, maybe you don't mention Bill Flynn's name, but you talk about a guy who had cancer, who was in very bad condition, and who, to some degree, can point to cannabis as one of the reasons why that cancer has now gone into remission. And that's probably true for a lot of people. And there's a lot of stories like that. And you need stories like that. You also need stories about poor young black kids getting arrested, getting a conviction on their record, and never being able to get a job. Because that's a big thing that's happened with the marijuana laws. The marijuana laws are part of institutionalized racism. Even now, after decrim, after legalization, the people who are being arrested for marijuana crimes in Massachusetts still are black people, not white people. The ACLU just came out with another report. You're 4 times more likely to be arrested for a marijuana crime after legalization, even still, if you're a black person.
Wow, that's terrible.
Yep.
Terrible.
I mentioned before that one of the 4 things that we talk about with marijuana is religion. And a lot of people don't realize, but cannabis is a religious sacrament and was used as a religious sacrament by people in India, all over Africa, and in parts of the Middle East. Unfortunately, or fortunately, as the situation may be, we being a Christian society have our own sacrament. And our Christian sacrament, of course, is wine, alcohol. So we've fought, even though alcohol is so horrifically damaging to our society, even though we actually banned it from our society for a while, we had to get it back. It had to come back. We had to allow alcohol in our society. And there are probably many, many reasons, but I'd maintain that one of the reasons is because it's the sacrament of the Christian religion. If our society had been more dominated by Africans or people from India or other groups, then the sacrament here in the United States might well have been cannabis, hashish, something like that.
Sure.
So it has to do with culture and cultural repression and the cultural overlords who kind of rule things. But also, just so people know, there's been a lot of study on why in the late 1930s cannabis was made illegal, and though there were many, many factors, there was the introduction of nylon, of synthetic fabrics that were competing against hemp fabric. There was the vilification of cannabis by timber barons, like the people who owned the newspaper chains, who wrote horrific stories, yellow journalism stories, to try and dump on marijuana and make sure that it was made illegal. And one of the reasons, of course, was because they knew the value of their timberland would drop tremendously if hemp were still allowed as a paper-making process. The USDA found that hemp could make paper 4 times more per acre over a 20-year period than trees. And the timber barons were worried about that, who also happened to be newspaper barons. They had vertically integrated. And there were other factors that had interests in making marijuana illegal. But after a lot of study by historians, they found the biggest factor is this thing called demagoguery. And some of you folks may have heard of demagoguery. That's when a politician makes up a phony problem and then makes everybody as afraid as they possibly can be of this phony problem and offers them the solution, that being themselves. So let's say, one of the big things was associating cannabis with Mexicans back in the 30s. And a lot of your politicians, especially down south, would say, that Mexican guy or that black jazz musician, he's gonna have your daughter seduced and he's gonna have her smoke some marijuana, and then they're gonna have sex. And I can stop that by making this marijuana illegal.
That was actually in
so it had a lot to do with bigotry
and
demagoguery.
That was in the public testimony, Mr. Downing. I believe you were telling us about this the other day in an unrelated conversation about cannabis by Henry, Anslinger in front of Congress? Yep. Harry Anslinger saying that those racist things in his testimony?
Oh, yeah, he directly in his... I know Catherine didn't want to read it because it's so horrifically offensive. But actually, this is stuff he was saying to Congress. He was talking about how, marijuana is being brought into our society by Hispanics and by blacks, especially jazz musicians. And he, in his statement, he directly said, marijuana makes white women want to have sex with black men, with African Americans, with Negroes. And this is the kind of thing that during the 30s you could say before Congress. But can you imagine, spewing that kind of racism before Congress today? It would be vilified. So I guess we have had some progress, haven't we?
Right.
Anything you want to weigh in on that topic of sort of the grassroots and why keeping it sacred is so important?
Well, as Bill was saying, the way they talked about it, here we are bringing it up. We talk about it, like I always say, is keep the conversation going. Don't let people like the Harry Anslingers, the Nixons of today, shut you down. We're here to say this is how they talked to people years ago. People, I'm not, again, political correctness and all that, I'm not a fan. Tell it like it is. This is about people, trying to heal people, and people need an out. So they're going to say, I don't want to be involved with it, and they're going to shut you down. And like I said, the conversation needs to be brought up. With the lobbying that we did, like I said, we've been up to the State House. We've reached out to all our senators and representatives. We ask everybody to become a member of MassCann, reach out to them, and we go, we'll talk with them. And, you may get an aid. somebody in the office, they take the pamphlet, whether they read it or not. We're not sure because, they really don't get back to us. But the ones that do talk with us, whether they're on our side or not on our side, or, they're in the middle, they're at least letting us know they're willing to listen. Okay. And when we were up there late last year, a couple of the senators up there, Senator Moore, there's a couple of others offhand. Sorry, the names just passed me. Yeah, they're supporters of us.
Rogers from
Cambridge? Dave Rogers, Jaylen, right? Brownsburger, is that one? Jaylen Brownsburger. And they've all said this to us is people need to come to talk to us. Our doors are open. And I don't think the people, and I mean people in general, feel as though they can do that. MassCann, not to say MassCann's opened the door for that, but MassCann is showing you, yes, you can do that. Your senators and representatives want you to do that. Call, leave a message, send an email if you don't want to go up and actually talk to them. But I think that's an important part, is getting that face-to-face contact to talk to them so they really understand what's coming from the people. A lot of the people that are there now are, our age, say, they're not the old school that was so, prohibited. They're willing to give it a listen. And like I said, if they're not, they're not doing that, or, at least they're giving that, they're lending the ear, they hear what they're saying, so they have both sides. They might go with us, they might not. But it's still enabling you to be able to speak and have somebody heard. We don't want to be shut out of this. There's no way we should be shut out of this. People of Massachusetts should be talking about this. This is even going with the passing of what we have now. Businesses, like Bill said, other states, the businesses are popping up left and right. Why can't we have that here? Years ago, people used to say, back in the day, Massachusetts made America. Everybody else's state constitution kind of relies on our constitution and, what Massachusetts had put together. And the people of Massachusetts should have first hand in this. The activism, the underground, the people. Again, this is a consumer thing. And that's what that's what we fight for. Like I said, this is a volunteer grassroots group. This is about community action, and if it takes us to go up to help you to speak to your representative, or, give you some information so you could yourself go, and speak up, so be it. That's what America or Massachusetts is what we're about. We should be able to talk these things out. And people should understand that the prohibition law has just been a downright, even to this day, has been, against the people. Okay. And like I said, to ACLU, stat right there, just, it confirms it. Why are the black and brown communities still being harassed? Enough, leave them alone. People want to start a small business, Again, this is a tough time now for everybody. This was like a last minute, I can't do anything, but I like to grow. I like to be able to do something. If I'm good at it, I should be able to express that, and if I'm not that good at it, well, then I guess I have to find something else to do. But again, this is, it's the people, and, whether it be consumer part or what, it's a community building thing. My thing was like your local farm stand, like Bill says. You go down the farm stands, vegetables you probably can't get at the supermarket. I grew up like that. We had a garden. We had that. We didn't rely on the Market Basket was the first one. Actually, it was Harvest Market and Heartland, and then Market Basket was Heartland and Market Basket were the competitors back then. Again, it's the conversation, of keeping the conversation alive, and not that people bring it back to where it was and never should have been. Yep. You know, like I said, people are more open about it, talking about it, the events that are popping up. You know, everybody's trying to get in on it, you know, one way or another, and which is a good thing. But again, you have to get the legislative part to follow in too, to let them know that we're not going away. We're here to stay. You know, we staked our ground, and we carry on. You know, that's what we do.
Wouldn't it be nice, Bill, if the legalization of marijuana had ended all of the problems with being a marijuana consumer in the state?
Right, exactly right.
It has not, and that's why MassCann still has an important task to fulfill, and that's still to represent the cannabis consumers in the state. And the real truth for everyone who's a cannabis consumer in the state is that the price of marijuana at these local shops as they open should be half of what it is right now. And why is the price at the marijuana dispensaries? You know, of course, none of them are open for rec, but even for medical, the prices are outrageous. They're charging way over $300 and sometimes even over $400 an ounce if you were to add up all those eighths for just regular old marijuana. Marijuana they could buy on the street for $200, $250, something like that. You know, almost half the price. And why
and it's probably better.
You know, if you've got a controlled market like a state where it's here in Massachusetts, it's controlled at the borders, okay? And you've got a product that is difficult to get hold of, and you charge people an awful lot more for it because it's a rare item because of its rarity. It's what they call gouging, and they do it at the ballpark. You know, where else would you spend $3 on a hot dog when you can have one at home for about 13 cents? Well, it's because they've got you trapped. You're at the ball game. You're not going to leave to get a hot dog. You're going to buy one there, even if the price is outrageous. And that's what's going on here in Massachusetts. Unless they start opening up enough of these stores to have real competition, the price is going to remain twice as expensive as on the black market. And one of our major goals to replace the black market with a legal market is going to have to wait. And the people that are running this operation on the state level, they don't appreciate the fact that opening up more stores means having a more effective cannabis law. That's the way it works. You need to have enough stores open. And they're not opening enough stores because they want to be so careful. This is what we heard from the medical marijuana thing. Oh, we're going to have the strictest, most careful medical marijuana laws in the entire nation. And that's what they're saying with recreational marijuana. Yeah, we'll do it, but it's going to be so restricted that only the billionaires can afford to do it. That's what it boils down to.
Right.
Well,
right. And even the part was, go ahead, Grant. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to say it seems like there might kind of be a perverse incentive here where the people who get open in the slow rollout then have an incentive to keep a monopoly for themselves and screw over everyone else.
Yeah, it's exactly like people
right from the get-go.
So if you're trying to move to Cape Cod, you want to have access. You want to be able to buy a piece of property, maybe a half acre or an acre or something like that. But once you live on Cape Cod, then you support all the zoning restrictions that say in order to buy a piece of property, a new piece of property, it's got to be at least an acre. So that's the exact same thing. It's when you're outside trying to get in, you want loosen, you want moderation, you want that. When you're inside, like these owners of these dispensaries, now that they have that jewel in their hand, they don't want others to have that same jewel because more jewels out there means each one is worth a little less.
Right, right.
Yep,
Yeah.
no, and I think that it speaks to a fundamental breakdown in our democratic process, which is somewhere along the line we stopped trying to facilitate the public good and started trying to mediate the public good through the private good of individual companies. And while that works great for some things, it also can create a situation where regulations are weaponized in that way. And it speaks to why it's so important, speaking of this, because I wanted to do a station break, to mention that the work that MassCann is doing provides the grassroots balance against the fiscal interests of those moneyed groups. And with the groups like MassCann, since the very foundation of this republic on the Boston Common at the Tree of Liberty, no less, has been to create a balance against whether it was the vested loyalist interest during the revolution or whether it's now trying to protect actual grassroots participation in the industry. The only way the public gets his voice is through people like yourselves and MassCann who are willing to take the time out of their day and advocate not necessarily what's best for them, but what's best for the community. And that's how legacies are left. And so it's partially why I'm so grateful to be here. This is Grant Smith-Ellis, and I've had the honor of continuing this conversation with Mr. Bill Downing, former president of MassCann, and Mr. Bill Flynn, the current president of MassCann. And for those of you who are still watching, really grateful for all of the viewers today. I just have a few questions left for Mr. Flynn and Mr. Downing. But before I get to those, I wanted to mention that we are doing this sixth panel in the MassCann Virtual Education Village panel series with Mr. Flynn and Mr. Downing today. And those of you who are interested in learning more about MassCann, the organization, can visit MassCann, MassCann.org, and find out more not only about the organization, but the previous panels we've done in the Education Village, future panels that we'll have coming up that'll be broadcast on this Facebook page as well, along with how to become a member of MassCann for $25 a year, which can be done via the website by clicking on the membership button in the top right. So, with that said, I wanted to ask both of you gentlemen,
Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry, no, I want to ask both of you gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind, what lessons, you've both been in the cannabis activism arena for longer than most of us have been alive. And so what lessons would you give the younger generation or even a younger version of yourself when getting involved with cannabis activism?
Well, I'd say one of the key things that I've found is that you've got to be willing to suck it up for the man. if you go to a MassCann meeting, you can wear jeans and t-shirt. As long as you cover your genitals, you're covered. But when you're going to the State House, or even if you're going to a town meeting and talking at your town level, it pays to wear formal attire, whether you're a lady wearing a dress, a nice looking dress, or whether you're a gentleman and you're wearing a jacket, as I noticed Grant is today. Thank you for dressing up for us, Grant. That's very nice. And perhaps even a tie. Even if you are a rebel to the heart, and I'm never gonna dress like the straight dudes. I don't want to look that way. It pays. You get a lot more respect from one of your legislators if you are dressed nicely. Maybe it doesn't have to be a suit and tie. Maybe it can be, just nice other clothing. It doesn't have to be, a super duper dress. Maybe it can just be something normal or slacks. Who knows? But just dressing nicely is important when you're trying to impress people with what you're saying, regardless of whether it should really matter or not.
Right. That's true. Yeah. That's true.
Another tip is there's a big difference between going to a legislator or going to a statewide event and speaking out for cannabis law reform and going to a town meeting of some sort and speaking out in your town about cannabis law reform. It's not too hard on state level to get up and talk if you don't have a fear of talking before crowds or whatever. But talking at a town meeting where you've got the chief of police, maybe the superintendent of schools, the town selectmen or managers or mayor, whatever it is, standing there looking at you while you're talking and talking in support of cannabis rights and cannabis law reforms and things like that can get kind of dicey. And I can tell you, I was an elected town meeting member in Reading, Massachusetts for about 6 years. And while I was working on the cannabis reform stuff, and of course, Reading is a total anti-cannabis town. They voted against Question 4 and all kinds of stuff. They've tried to ban any kind of cannabis operations in the town. And all of this was brought before me. And as one of the meeting members, I was allowed to speak to these things. And I was supposedly allowed to these things, but I got to tell you, it was shut down, basically. Whenever I had to speak, I was getting cut off. I was being treated very poorly. I had people that I was sitting next to actually move away because I had spoken out in favor of medical marijuana. So it's hard at town level to be an activist, but that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where, because there are people who are in opposition, but also at the ends of these meetings, I had other residents coming up to me and saying, Bill, you're saying what I was afraid to say. I wouldn't say. You said it.
Right.
So.
Mr. Flynn, is there anything you'd like to weigh in on about the lessons you'd give your younger self when it comes to getting involved with cannabis activism?
The same thing is you have to have a thick skin for this. It's a lot of like Bill says, a lot of people are going to be on you, whether at the city level, your city, town. Once you out yourself, so to speak, there are people that are going to speak out and attack at you. I've had it myself, and now I see those people, and they're trying to get in the business. And I just laugh, and I'm like, yeah, where were you? Just because now you have money, now it's important, and like I said, you got to be able to take that. I coached my son's little league. I coached youth hockey. And once people, oh, you're that guy, you're the pot guy, you're that guy. Like, yeah, just a dad like, any other dad, just I happen to support, but they don't know my whole story, not that I have to be telling everybody my story, but to be called out like that. And again, people come up afterwards and say, yeah, I understand and I support you, but, because of where I'm at, I can't just come out and say it, which again is understandable, but that's not how I was brought up. I was always brought up to speak up, question authority. And yes, it's got me in trouble many, many times because I spoke up, and that's, I don't know if that's just the way it's been ingrained to me or what. And like I said, that's a conversation that needs to be heard, needs to be talked about to this day. And like Bill says, your city, town, that's where the rubber hits the road. And when I got involved with this, that was the thing, was I'm standing for what I believe in. It's worked for me. I should be able to share that with somebody else, or that experience, and let them decide. If it works, great. If it don't, well, at least they had that opportunity. And sorry, no, I wasn't gonna not talk about it. I wasn't not gonna just hide in a hole and that was it. And no, this is The whole prohibition has been a disgrace on what everything American is about. Everything what that country was, fought for, against that, to be, and there was a lot of other things too along the way that should have been fought for that didn't. Okay, that everybody was against, but didn't. But now it's like, enough, enough's enough. This is, we all know, cannabis works, it helps, whether you want to believe it or not. That's, your opinion, but as far as I'm there, I'm speaking about it. I enjoy it. And yes, I use it. I use it like a nutraceutical. And I found out at a very early age, to stay away from prescription drugs, stuff like that. Cancer helped me, to stay away from that stuff. And I've been I'm not a vegan, all natural guy, but yeah, no, I don't want that shit in my system. And cannabis, how I use it, well, it's through oils, tinctures, smoking. It helps me. And sorry, I'm not going away, not too soon anyway. I'm healthy. I feel great. Whereas in the past, when I wasn't able to, get my medicine and use it, yes, very depressing times. And not to say job loss, but yeah, stuff like that because of, who you are, what you do, friends that, oh, it's all cool when, it was hidden, but now you're fighting to get it legal. And it's like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, it should be out here. Everybody should be a part of it. And, they agree to it, but they're not about to put their face off because of what they do, how they do what they do for work and stuff like that, which to me is, it's terrible, but that's where they are in life. That's their jobs. And it's too bad that jobs hold people like that. The drug testing and all that. No. I worked at a lot of jobs where there were a lot of drunks there, drinking during the work and everything, and nothing ever happened to them. And it's like, yeah, it's ridiculous. And now you see it now, even to this day. How come the recreational shops aren't open? Like the liquor stores are open. Well, we can't have all these people, alcoholics, whatever, get sick. Understandable. I understand that. But what about the people that need their medicine also? The cannabis. All right. It's door swings both ways when you go into each store. Okay. You go in and out the same way. It's ridiculous. And that's why I just say it.
That's a great example, Bill, to point out that there are still issues. The fact that we have legalization, we still have policy that's based somewhat on reefer madness and on a lack of understanding. Of course, as you point out, the governor says, well, we can't stop liquor stores from being open because if severe alcoholics are forced to stop, they could have deliriums and hallucinations and like that. And of course, that speaks to the extreme danger of alcohol. But the same is true also for people who are trying to get off opiates and who are using cannabis as a way of moderating the withdrawal.
Sorry about that.
A lot of really evidence that cannabis works as has helped people to get off of opiates.
Yep.
A lot more research coming out every month pointing to that significant idea.
Yeah,
and to give so much weight to alcohol for the problems that stopping people from getting alcohol gets, and give zero weight to the problems that are faced by people who use cannabis having to stop, shows a social prejudice.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that got off alcohol and using cannabis.
Exactly true, Bill.
Absolutely. So again,
where are those? That's another issue that I think is big. Bill, I just want to mention something because Bill was talking. People had actively worked against cannabis law reform, then the entrepreneur who's opening up cannabis business, and this is going on all over the state, and the primary example, chiefs of police, and prosecutors. So we have prosecutors across the state who've worked to jail probably hundreds, if not thousands, maybe some of them even tens of thousands of people for marijuana crimes. And now they're using their status in society in order to get licensing so that they can operate cannabis businesses. The way this works is through the host community agreements. All right. If Bill Flynn or I or Grant or any normal person walks into a town hall and says, I want to start a cannabis business, a marijuana business in your town, you would probably get kicked out pretty darn quick. But if you're a former chief of police, if you're a former prosecutor, you're someone who has status in the town, whether that status was associated with screwing on potheads or not, you get extra attention. You actually get paid attention to. You have influence, and that's what pays. Unfortunately, that's what makes the difference here in Massachusetts to whether you get a hosting community agreement or not. A, whether you're an influencer in the town already, and B, whether you're a billionaire who can afford a huge legal team to push through all the contractual obligations you need.
All right.
Bigger breakdown, which is that we were talking a lot earlier about equity in cannabis licensing for those who are harmed by the drug war. And we know that that equity entails both communities that were disproportionately targeted and people who were targeted themselves with cannabis arrests or any arrest under 94 Chapter G in Massachusetts. So one of the key breakdowns in that equity system is that while the Cannabis Control Commission on the state level, the people who issue licenses, have an equity mandate, and they have created equity priority review processes for different categories of applicants, local towns and cities have no such equity mandate. And in fact, a lot of them are doing exactly what Mr. Downing just was talking about, which is making it easy for connected people to get licenses and entirely ignoring everyone else. And so this is an issue that has been ripe for discussion for such a long time, and I'm so glad it came up because it's what people on the ground in the queues are upset about, and I'm glad we got to talk about it.
Yeah, and there's one other issue I just want to bring up because we've only mentioned it briefly, but one of the main focuses of MassCann right from the very start was industrial hemp. And there are not a lot of people who fully appreciate how important industrial hemp is. It's a fiber, it's a food, and now with production of CBD and other cannabinoids that are existence in hemp, it's also a medicine. And we finally do have the re-legalization of hemp since 1955. It's been illegal in the United States, but the 2018 Farm Bill finally legalized nationally the growth of hemp. And the state of Massachusetts is now regulating the growth of hemp. And, just as a funny, curious side note, in Massachusetts law, there was no such thing as hemp for a long, long time. Back in the old days, the law actually required farmers to grow hemp and paid them a bounty for growing hemp, more than its market value. The state would make up that difference and pay you that amount of money because they needed hemp for making sailcloth, sail rope, and things like that. But then the federal government made it illegal in 1955, and since then it's been illegal in Massachusetts until it was recreated as a new thing in the legalization bill of 2016, where all of a sudden you had two different things. You had marijuana and you had hemp. And the difference between hemp and marijuana was the amount of THC. THC, of course, is the active ingredient that gets you high. So if it has so little of that active ingredient that it really can't get you high, then it would be defined as hemp. And that's the idea anyway. But the standard is extremely low. It's 0.3%, which is way below where it needs to be. Just to wrap this up, Bill, the regulation of hemp here in Massachusetts is enforced by the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. And they, like the other departments of the state that touch anything cannabis, they have regulated it as though it were plutonium. They've put through all kinds of regulations saying, handcuffing farmers in our state. A lot of farmers had hoped, finally, we'll have a crop that we'll be able to sell for a decent amount of money. And maybe I won't have to sell my land to be developed into condos, which is what's happened in my town, Reading. We've had 4 farms since 20 years ago when I moved here. We've had 4 farms turned into condos. And it's happening all across the state because of the value of the land. But if a farmer could have a decent crop, like a hemp crop, and make some money, maybe we'd preserve some open land and have a couple of farms left instead of just tracts and tracts of condos. But MDAR has handcuffed farmers. They've told them they cannot do direct sales. Bill and I were just talking about farm stands. And why can't a farmer sell hemp at his farm stand? Well, there's no good reason other than just reefer madness. They're not allowed to. Farmers can't flower, period, zip, at all. And when we asked MDAR why can't they, MDAR's response was, oh, well, it looks like marijuana. And it's like light dawning over Marblehead. I mean, idiot. No, you can't say that. And they also say that hemp cannot be part of any kind of edible thing. You can't have a hemp brownie. You can't have a hemp gummy. You can't have a hemp lozenge or anything like that. And why? Why? There's no reason at all. Why?
Why?
Because we have power, and having power does us no good unless we use it now.
Yeah, but
and
the gas
station is all about.
The gas station down the street can sell a CBD with nothing in it edible. That's okay.
Yep. MDAR can't regulate those people.
Any comments on the hemp situation, Mr. Flynn?
MassCann was leverage into passing the hemp bill here in Massachusetts. Although it kind of got out of hand, well, again, that's not how it was written. It was supposed to be that the hemp farmer was, grow hemp and be able to sell it. But again, the regulators get in there and regulate, and it screws the people. Instead of trying to help people, like Bill says, family farms in Massachusetts are going away to condos because, as you can tell by today and the past few weeks, New England weather is horrible. It needs protection and stuff, and people don't have the means to do that. Years ago, farming was farming. That's what we did. Again, you had your farm stand, or you took it to the market where you had your little farm stand and people bought it. And the big markets open up. But that's it. These things should be still, viable. You should be able to have that, cannabis, sell all parts of that flower, the farmer itself. Why should I have to wholesale it off to somebody else? I grew it. I should be able to sell it, and like I say, you pay your taxes or whatever. You say, okay, and that should be done with, period.
Well, that's actually one of the very cool current license types that's existing. It's great that you bring that up, Mr. Flynn, because right now for folks who are thinking about doing maybe adult use cannabis, there's a license type called a micro business that allows you to cultivate up to 5,000 square feet. I know you know that license type well, Mr. Flynn. And as part of that micro business license, not only can you cultivate and manufacture and purchase up to 2,000 pounds from other cultivators per year, you can also apply for a special new program that myself and some other folks helped to write into the regulations called the delivery endorsement. And that actually allows farmers, like anyone who would wish to apply under 5,000 square feet, to sell retail directly to consumers in Massachusetts. So I wanted to plug that.
Oh, there you go. Good. I like it.
Yeah, that's great. The only thing that the host community agreement part of micro business licensing were somehow dealt with properly, because it has not been.
Oh, could you explain a little bit? I know you guys have given so much of your time today, and we're all grateful, but maybe before we do the outro, could we hear a little bit more information about why host community agreements and micro businesses have had some issues, Mr. Downing?
Well, part of it is that, a lot of the reasons that people are starting micro businesses is because they're not billionaires. I've already pointed out that if you have a lawyer or a team of lawyers, that they know how to make the process roll forward for you, and that it's an awful lot easier to get paid attention if you are able to hire, for instance, a former police chief or a former state rep or a former prosecutor to help you with your efforts to get a hosting community agreement. So as with almost anything in the United States, even if it's a micro business license, the town is still going to basically big money talks and little money walks. And that's just part of that. But also there's just restrictions on local business owning. I'm sure you're familiar with this, Grant, that if a town, for instance, voted in majority against question 4, then they have the ability to have an ordinance that basically bans all kinds of marijuana licensing in there. Yeah. And it was suggested to towns that they could do this by our Attorney General after the law passed. And so, of course, towns immediately did so. So, all cannabis businesses are limited by that. And I believe that also applies to delivery.
Right.
Yeah.
I will say,
I believe there is a chart that has that tells you which one. Cities and towns that say yes or no, and then whether they're allowing medical or even delivery. There's a chart on the CCC website, I believe.
Kay Doyle oversaw the implementation of that municipal equity tracker, Mr. Flynn, and yes, that's on the CCC website. And thank you for that explanation, Mr. Downing, because I think a lot of people think that the licensing at the CCC is kind of the licensing because of the way the conversation is sometimes presented in the media, and folks don't really realize the impact that those local municipal processes have on that, as we were discussing. So thank you both for allowing me a little bit of time there to highlight that issue for those smaller local businesses. So,
sure.
My name is Grant Smith-Ellis. We were initially going to go an hour today for our 6th MassCann Virtual Education Village panel with the current president of MassCann, Mr. Bill Flynn, former president of MassCann and cannabis business owner, Mr. Bill Downing. We ended up going 90 minutes. These two gentlemen took time out of their even pandemic-influenced, very busy schedules to be here with us. I'm grateful that we got to go that extra 30 minutes and to give all the people who have been watching time to join in on the conversation. We've definitely had some more viewers on this panel at different times than I think I've ever seen before. So it shows the interest in hearing the insights you gentlemen bring to the table and the value that the community puts on not only the time you spent in the community, but the knowledge you've gained along the way, and why that knowledge is so important towards strategically going forward, continuing to fight against prohibition and protect the rights of cannabis consumers. So before I turn it over to you both for a quick outro and any last remarks, I will remind folks once again that today's panel was sponsored by MassCann through the Virtual Education Village. The MassCann Virtual Education Village and more information about MassCann can be found at masscann.org. You can see all the previous panels. They can also be found on MassCann's YouTube channel and MassCann's Facebook. Future panels will air on all of those locations as well, and you can join MassCann and become a member for $25 a year at masscann.org.
I'm sorry, Grant. I believe it's $30 for the membership at MassCann.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Flynn.
$30.
You would know that a lot better than I. So you can sign up at masscann.org for $30 and become a member to support all of the work that we've talked about today, to support the fact that the organization is continuing on the ground fights every day, and to support the fact that the Boston Freedom Rally is a crucial component of civil disobedience in the Commonwealth related to cannabis. So with that plug handled, I now will turn it over to either of you gentlemen for your concluding remarks before we say goodbye.
Well, I'm happy to make a concluding remark. I want to thank you, Grant. All the other sessions, you've done an excellent job. So thank you very much. I encourage people to participate. It's actually, I hate to be the heavy, but more than an opportunity, it's a responsibility. That we live in one participative democracy. And the only way it really works is if we participate. And MassCann is one issue, many issues in which people, in my opinion, should participate, but this is one of them. And it might be belittled in many ways. For a long time, it was belittled because it was thought that our task was impossible. We were told, what, you want to legalize marijuana? Are you out of your mind? That is never going to happen. Never happen. And yet somehow it has happened. And how has it happened? Well, it's democracy. That's what it's all about. It's all about democracy. And the only way it works is if you participate in it. That means not just me and Flynn and Grant, that means everybody out there participating, because it's not the individual that really makes the difference in a democracy. It's the groups of individuals. And we all knew all along that there's a lot of people who liked cannabis out there in the community. But it was hard to prove until we actually got to the polls. And then we found out, we're the majority. What do you know? That's sweet. But it took participating in our democracy to find that out. And I got to tell you, it's been fun. All along, it's been fun. And you kind of treat it like a hobby. You try and remember not to let, personalities get under your skin. And you move forward as you can on the issues. So that's my concluding remark.
Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, again, thank you, Grant, for stepping up and helping us out with this virtual conferences that we're having for the Ed Village. Like I said, these conversations need to stay alive. People need to talk about it. And as Bill said, democracy is what brings us together. People are able to talk about it. You need to step up, not for yourself, but for your children. And that's the way I looked at it, again, when I got back involved. I couldn't let anybody else's child, anybody's family go through what me and my family went through. And, and for my child, never have to go through anything like that. It's a terrible situation. So being bold, being strong, being able to stand up and get with a group, like-minded people. And that's what gives you the power, being able to stand together and be able to, in somewhat of a civil way of expressing that. And that's, I think, we do. And I think we do a fine job at it, here at MassCann. Yes, there's a lot of personalities that are there and, but you get by. We do the best we can. You try to work with the people you can. And it's not for everybody. But, it's the cause. You're not there for the applause. You're there for the cause. And that's where people lose it. The applause comes, in many different ways. And our rally, I think, proves it. From the little, rally that we had to what it's been and where it's still at, it's a gathering of people that come from all over, you know, that we've met over the years. And yeah, yeah.
And I'm very grateful that we all got to have this conversation today in a way that I thought really did justice to the level of detail that not only these stories have, but the policy has. Because all too often people try to condense these discussions into 10-minute segments, 15-minute segments, and you can't do that because these are
No,
human stories.
no. Like I said, these are, again, we were supposed to do an hour. I guess obviously we must have gone over an hour. And again, we could go on and on. These, like I said, the memories, the people. It's crazy. The people that have gone, that were there. The people that were there and had passed, that fought along with you. And the people that are still struggling. Still need the conversation. It's something that has to be talked about and kept talked about. I apologize.
Bill, it speaks to the fact that core to real activism is that level of passion. And I know it can be difficult for us to talk about things that touch to the core of why we find this community so special, but your words do it justice in a way that no one else can do. So I'm really grateful you shared that with us.
Thank you, Grant. Thanks again for giving us this opportunity.
Thank both of you. I thank both of you deeply from the bottom of my heart for sharing your authentic stories and for taking the time out of your day to share that knowledge, because for those of us who are younger, it's inspirational to hear you guys talk about the war stories and the successes and what makes you proud to do this work. And it gives me hope that going forward people are going to listen to this and see what makes the core of the community so special. So I'm honored.
So it's just one little thing there. Bill had said that when, you know, when I got involved with this, you know, oh, this isn't going to happen. No way. And I look back and I smile because all those people that said no way are like, wow. But it's not the way we were looking at it. This still changes. This, again, like I said, this conversation needs to go on and on and on. Lots of effort put into this by everybody through the years. And the people that, you know, didn't make it along the way, you know, okay, those efforts count. And they mean. And with all this crap that's happening now, these conversations need to stay alive. That's it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Flynn, Mr. Downing, and it's absolutely true, and it's why it's such an honor. This is Grant Smith-Ellis here with Bill Flynn, President of MassCann, and Mr. Bill Downing, former President of MassCann. It's why I'm honored to have been given the opportunity to chat so in depth with both of you gentlemen today. I know we've had so many comments on the Facebook video that are so touching. Can't even read them all. They came in so fast. So I'm sure Mr. Flynn and Mr. Downing will take some time to review those as well. So we do see all the folks who were so appreciative of the time you gave us today. As we said, this has been the MassCann Education Village, our 6th panel in discussion with Mr. Bill Flynn and Mr. Bill Downing. Please visit masscann.org to find out more information about this wonderful organization and to help fight against prohibition and in favor of rights for cannabis consumers in Massachusetts and elsewhere. So, thank everyone for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thank you to our guests for being with us. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Graham. Much appreciated. And Bill Downing, yep, much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Bye now.